A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahawashi, Ba'ashem Akakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of wanted to read through Tobit, one of his first chapters, and kind of just pull out some some fruits, some conduct, the way he conducted himself, and kind of just do some parallels between the way Tobit conducted himself in the midst of captivity, as well as we are in a situation where we are in the midst of captivity, right? And kind of just do some parallels and understand, as the scriptures talk about, how the things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, right? Because when you look at the culture of, well, I'll put it like this: when you look at so-called like black culture or Hispanic culture or whatever, all it leads to is really just demonic. It's just Satanism, death, decay, destruction. It doesn't actually lead forth into life. You don't see our people that conduct themselves in a way that promotes a sentiment of life. It just promotes decay, death. And the scriptures say that the wages of sin is death, right? So, how did Tobit conduct themselves? And that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch upon, because I find one of the reasons I like to go into certain of these accounts, because we don't have, as a nation, we don't have righteous templates of how how Israelite men and Israelite women are supposed to essentially conduct themselves, right? So I kind of just wanted to pick one of our forefathers, Tobit. I don't have the scriptures with me. I just have the Apocrypha. So I kind of just wanted to read through a little bit. So I might quote a couple of scriptures here and there. And, Lord's will, as always, that this lesson may be edifying, right? Since we're in the midst of captivity, there are certain things and mindsets we can pull out, from the way our forefather Tobit conducted himself, and then seeing that, and appropriating a lot of those things also, right? Because, as we wait, for salvation, the scriptures say that, for the elect's sake, the Lord will shorten the days, to roughly paraphrase, and when we see all these things coming to pass, also when we see, so for example, like I'll just use this as an example, like Russia. I'm sorry, not Russia, but it was America that recently began to reinvest or start developing nuclear weapons. So you start to see, these nations are essentially in a warlike spirit, right? So, as it says in I believe it's Second Peter's, this is the third chapter, what kind of conversation we ought to be, what I'm saying? And that conversation, when you go into it in the etymology, is essentially it's a manner of life. And then we're going to go see that. What is Tobit's conversation? What was his manner of life? What was the way he conducted himself in the midst of captivity, right? So I'm just going to read a bit of that. And as I said before, Lord's will is always that this lesson may be edifying, right? So, I know I did a bit of a long intro there, but hopefully, you find this lesson edifying, right? So this is the book of Tobit, chapter 1. I'll start at verse 1 and I'll read down, just to hit a couple key points here. And it says, this is the book of the word Tobit, the son of Tobiah, the son of Ananiah, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabiel, of the seed of Asael, of the tribe of Naphtali, who in the time of Manasseh, king of the Assyrians, was led captive out of Thisbe, which is at the right hand of that city, which is called properly Naphtali in Galilee above Asher. I believe that's referring to Asher. Let's see, and it says verse 3, and it says, and I, Tobit, walked in the days of my life in the ways of truth and justice, and did many alms deeds to my brethren and to my nation. And who came with me to Nineveh in the land of the Assyrians. As a matter of fact, let me get a precept for verse 3. 1 second. Because it says that he walked all the days of my life in truth and justice, right? So that's kind of like, when you parallel that, to us and appropriate that to us, we conduct ourselves in a certain way, even in the midst of captivity, because you start to see the behaviors of the ungodly of our people and how that's leading to their demise and destruction. When you go into the law, for example, and you read about a stubborn son, one of the things that, when he wouldn't listen to his father or his mother, they would take him out to the elders and they would basically stone him with stones that he die, right? Because he's a glutton, he's a drunkard, he's lazy, so on and so forth, right? That is the type of judgment that is prescribed to the mass majority of our people, right? Because you start to see the fruits thereof, you start to see the way that they behave themselves. And it's not that we're going to execute that type of judgment. The Lord's going to put the Spirit, upon, Trump and, these different ICE agents. He's going to be, as it says in Isaiah, that Assyrian, the rod of mine anger. The Lord is going to put the Spirit upon this modern day Assyrian, using Trump and using, their technological departments to essentially punish our people because they don't want to hearken unto understanding to the Lord's word via his prophets, right? And essentially turning back to the Lord, right? So the point I was going to make is because he said he walked in a certain way with truth and justice. This is Sirach chapter 19, verse 29, and it says, "And a man may be known by his look, and one that hath understanding by his countenance when thou meetest him." It says, verse 30, "A man's attire, excessive laughter, and gait show what he is," right? And gait kind of refers to, because it's spelled here, when you type that word in the etymology, it refers to a way a person walks, right? So, a way a person conduct themselves, you can tell by the way they walk. They walked in a particular fashion. They didn't, and it's not just in a physical sense, but it's just the way they carry themselves. Because Tobit here is, he's showing that he carried himself in a certain way, not like how you see a lot of our people, they carry themselves, especially our young men, of course. You don't see them carry on certain types of conversation. They had a certain type of reverence for Yahweh Bashim El Shai, and this is what Tobit's explaining here, right? So let me go back to verse 4. This is Tobit chapter 1, verse 4. And it says, "And I was in my own country in the land of Israel, being but young, and all the tribe of Naphtali, my father, fell from the house of Jerusalem, which was chosen of all the tribes of Israel, and all the tribes should sacrifice there, where the temple of the habitation of the Most High was consecrated and built for all ages. Now all the tribes which gathered together revolted, and the house of my father Naphtali sacrificed unto the heifer Baal. But I alone went often to Jerusalem at the feast, and it was ordained unto the people of Israel by an everlasting decree." And you find that's in you can find that in Deuteronomy, the 16th chapter, when it requires the males to go to Jerusalem, right? And it says here, "Having the first fruits and the tenth of increase, of which was first shorn. Them gave I at the altar to the priests, the children of Aaron." The 10th part of all increase I gave the sons of Aaron who ministered at Jerusalem. The 10th part I sold away and went and spent it every year at Jerusalem. So when you go into like the first fruits, in the Torah, you'll find that, when you have, like, say, for example, you have, you have some abundance, because when we were in the land, the different tribes were allocated the different portions, of the land, and except for the tribe of Levi, of course, right? And their position was essentially to administer the priest's office, perform sacrifices, burn incense, so on and so forth. Now you have the other tribes. They would essentially give their tithes to the priest to be able to take care of, essentially it was a way of taking care of the priests, because they perform certain duties, right? Certain laborious work. And also when you go even further, they would take that substance that the children of Israel would basically give, and it would be also given unto people such as widows, orphans, because the way the law I'm sorry, the way the Lord set things up, it was always to keep in mind those who were less fortunate, right? And this is one of the problems that you see in this society today, because with Trump, this is a little going off topic, but you see Trump, he's stripping away all the different benefits of essentially the poor of our people. Well, we are the poor, right? But under a wise and God-fearing society, you would have these measures put forth in place to make sure that the people who were less fortunate has some substance. But on the other flip side as well, you see a lot of people, they depend on the comforts and the benefits of Egypt rather than actually turning to the Lord, because there was a certain way we had to consider, right? We had to conduct ourselves, I should say, right? But I kind of wanted to make that point there, because something as simple as, like, for example, when you read about certain laws like gleaning grapes, what you would do is you wouldn't take away all the grapes of the land. You would have some substance put aside for those who were less fortunate, widows, like I mentioned before, because like a widow, she doesn't have a husband, so she's not able to be, she wasn't able to be taken care of, right? So orphans, the child who loses their mothers and their fathers, they're not able to be able to work at a certain age, being very young or whatever, right? The Lord made sure, as it says in Isaiah, the 55th chapter, the Lord's ways are higher than our ways, right? And this is why the laws are so important and so much needed upon the planet Earth, right? To be able to govern substance properly, right? Anyways, didn't kind of went off on a little tangent there, but this is let me continue. And it says, this is verse 8, and it says, and I gave the third, I gave unto them to whom it was meet, as Deborah my father's mother had commanded me, because I was left an orphan by my father. Furthermore, when I was come to the age of a man, I married Anna of my own kindred, and I begat Tobias. And when we were carried away captives in Nineveh, all my brethren and all those that were of my kindred did eat the bread of the Gentiles, but I kept myself from eating, and because I remembered the Most High with all my heart, right? So he saw those defiled foods. I believe Daniel even did something very similar when in Daniel, the first chapter, he didn't want to defile himself with the king's meat, right? So, I think even Judith as well, if you go into her story, she even did something very similar, because she also packed food when she went into the quarters of the general Holofernes, right? So they were remembering. The point is here, that they were remembering the Most High's ways, his culture, his conduct, right? Because we have dietary laws, but to go even further than that, it was also about remembering the Most High in the midst of captivity, that because we know that, as it says in Deuteronomy, we are a holy people unto the Lord thy power, right? So even in captivity, of course we're not saved by keeping all the laws 100%, but the point is, Tobit had a mind frame of remembering the Most High Yahweh Bashem El Shai with all his heart, with all his mind, right? And it says in verse 13, and it says, and the Most High Yahweh gave me grace and favor before Manasseh, so I was his purveyor. I believe that word also refers to somebody who does, like today's terms, when you have businesses, it's like somebody who is, they man, what's the word that they call it? It's a special like like procurement, basically. So they make sure there's supplies, like say for example, you work in an office, somebody who works in procurement, they would make sure, okay, your office is okay, you have your sticky notes, you have your pens, your pencils, paper, the printer works, you have the necessary equipment in that space in order for things to kind of, for the wheels to be greased and things to be, continue working, right? So even in his space and in captivity, the Lord had, favor upon him, right? So, where was I? Okay, verse 14, and it says, and I went to Media and left a trust with Gabriel, the brother of Gabrias, the rages of the city in Media, 10 talents of silver. Now Manasseh was dead, and Sennacherib his son reigned in his stead, whose estate was troubled, that I could not go into Media, right? So also what I wanted to just bring out in regards to verse 13, he had a certain type of conduct. And Paul also touches upon this when you read Romans, the 13th chapter, being subject to essentially, I'm just kind of roughly paraphrasing it, being subject to magistrates, because, the Lord ordains certain people, in these different positions where we're at. So whether you're in, like for example, Nehemiah was a cupbearer, he didn't try to poison the king, for example. He conducted himself as somebody who feared the Most High, right? He didn't try to, flip the table over and try and pick up a spear and try and delete the king, or what I'm saying, like he didn't act as a nigga, to roughly paraphrase, not paraphrase, but to be blunt, right? He didn't behave like that. He conducted himself in a certain type of fashion, even in the midst of captivity, right? And that's something, that is something also to keep in mind too, because we're subject to payments, right? So we don't try and basically become overzealous, or we feel like we just do whatever we want, right? I think even Howard Shai said render unto the things that are Caesar's and render unto the things that are Most High, to roughly paraphrase, right? So where was I? Verse 16, and it says, in the time of Manasseh I gave many alms to my brethren, and gave my bread to the hungry, and my clothes to the naked. And if I saw any of my nation dead, or cast about the walls of Nineveh, I buried him. If Sennacherib had slain any, and when he was come, I fled from Judea, I buried them privately. For in his wrath, he killed many, but the bodies were not found when they were sought of the king. And when one of the Ninevites went and complained of me to the king, that I buried them, I hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death. I withdrew myself for fear, right? So he was burying those of his own nations that were dead, right? When you've seen the atrocities of our own people, right? But he was essentially, the point is also, he was performing certain deeds, right? And the scriptures say that Riches don't profit in a day of wrath, but righteousness can deliver from death, right? So you start to see the way that he conducted himself, even in the midst of captivity, right? And that's pretty much, the main point to hit in this lesson is that, the Lord can remember us for those good, things, even in the midst of captivity, like, right? Because it's essentially like it's spiritual. It's like a spiritual investment that you make, right? You did these particular things, right? And that thing, it goes up, the Lord remembers those things, right? So where was I? Okay, I'll read this here. Then all my goods were forcibly taken away. Neither was there anything left me beside my wife Anna and my son Tobias, right? So that's pretty much the point. I kind of wanted to just, read that, just to show that, Tobit, even in the midst of, and then that's another point, you can hit as well is the suffering. He was suffering, and then the bird when you go later on throughout his story, the bird pooped in his eye, right? He was blind, right? So he was suffering in a righteous sense, as opposed to, you see, the majority of our people, they suffer in essentially a wicked sense, right? When you go through First Peter's, it says that the fourth chapter, the end of all things is at hand, right? So charity essentially covers a multitude of sins, right? So these are just righteous templates, examples to be able to extrapolate in terms of conduct, because we don't conduct ourselves as, we know that we're an upright people. Jacob is a plain man, dwelling in tents, and the word plain refers to somebody who's upright. You know what I'm saying? So that's pretty much the point. I kind of just wanted to hit a couple points here and there, but Lord's will, this was edifying, right? So just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.